Today's video starts with little bears with big dreams. Dreams of flying, despite the fact that they grew up in a forest where there's literally no room at all for a hang glider. They didn't let that stop them. Like a camel dreaming of being a scuba diver, they just made it happen. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make it happen with some old school techniques. I love my 3D printer, but I'm going to keep changing it up every so often because I hear you. Some people say I don't have a 3D printer, so let's go old school today. We've got some EVA foam. This is from Hobbycraft, 15 sheets for £5. They're A4 size in tans or skin colours. We're going to need a couple of these sheets. They're about 2mm thick, something like that. There are lots of other things you can use. It doesn't have to be this. I almost use greaseproof paper, but I'll probably tell you about that as we go through the build. So there's that. We also need, a key component is some sort of artificial plant with wire in it, so it's nice and pliable, because we're going to need the stem. It's helpful that it's brown because it means we might not have to spray it. Doesn't matter what the flowers are on the end. This came from HomeSense. It was £3.99, or TK Maxx or TJ Maxx. You know what I'm talking about. So one or two of these would be also helpful, and of course some glue, and most importantly, a dream. So let's get to make that dream come true in the painting cupboard. Let's throw caution to the wind and show no restraint. Anything can happen in the cupboard of paint.
Here's your man, and I just keep him around to get a sense of scale. I drew the first wing on a bit of greaseproof paper. I was thinking about using greaseproof paper because it was nice and see-through, but it doesn't paint very well, doesn't take paint very well. Here, the most important thing about this foam is just starting to pull it and stretch it and squeeze it and pull it around. It becomes nice and thin, and then it takes on this slightly leathery texture rather than just being foam-like. So then just sizing up roughly to the template and then stretching a bit more, but the danger when you're stretching this foam is, for God love of, you break it. So don't worry, because it actually afforded an interesting opportunity then to sort of make a patchwork wing. So I mixed and matched the colours a little bit, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But right now, just doing some cuts along two of the sides so that we can strap or tie the wing material to the frame that we're going to make in a minute. So I thought this would be the best way to go about it. I was wrong, which again we'll see in a moment. So just carefully sort of cutting out sections so they've got like little ties, almost like tassels, that you can then tie to the frame. And that's the idea anyway. Here, just then pulling away the bit that I broke and finding a replacement bit with similar tassels sort of cut, and it's the slightly different color, so it's the next color along in the spectrum of those sheets. But I just thought it might be nice to have a bit of contrast rather than just being all in one type of tan color, because leather comes in different colors, right? Different shades. Maybe they skinned a deer and then a possum. Who knows what those Murderbears get up to. So now then just gluing it on, trimming it to size. And then once I had that piece, I was like, oh yeah, this looks kind of cool. So I then sort of started layering slightly, or at least changing up the colors. Here I'm just marking it out roughly, cutting it with the scissors, and then gluing it into place with my favorite Loctite glue, which again I managed to get all over my fingers. But once I'd stuck it in place, I didn't want the wing to then become sort of two-ply, to become thick. So I just glued down the edges and then cut away the bit that I didn't need. So just folding that back, and you can see where it's two-ply there. I'm just going in and trimming away some of it so that it can just be singular and nice and thin, as a glider presumably would be. I don't know if a glider would work with leather wings, but there we go. Once I've got the first wing, then I started to think about the frame and cutting off the small branches so that you're left with a nice long straightish piece, because I'm going to use that for the the main part of the frame. And this is the point where I realized those tassels are far too short because they won't pull round and fasten round. But, oh look, you can pull them, but then doink, off they come. So I stretched some of them out, and then some of them I had to replace. But again, it just made for some patchwork, more patchwork effect. So here I'm just working out, like, okay, how long do I need these tassels to be? What sort of shape do I need to make this frame? And just trimming with a wire cutter to get roughly the right sort of shape and size. So I've got this central piece, this X, and so that it sits nice and flat, then I'm just, where they join, I'm just cutting a little indentation on both pieces so that as they slot together they're a little bit flatter rather than two round pieces sat on top of each other, so they just join a bit nicer. And then here's just a bit of that wire you get that wraps up cables and whatnot when you buy a charger or something. So I had some pieces of that in my might come in useful one day box, so I used that just to get the thing organized. But I always intend to go back after this because it's left a slightly, it's not really a very rustic feel. So I'm going to go back and then cover it with some proper twine a bit later. So now it's just to hold it, to brace it properly. And then these smaller ones for the middle piece, the pieces, again, just cutting away little indentations so it all slots together a bit more tidily. And cutting both sides, trying not to slice into my fingers. Always cut away from yourself, cut away from yourself. It was good advice in the comments a few weeks ago, so thank you for that. And then here I've got some craft wire. I think it's like 0.4 of a millimeter, so very fine. And I'm just using that to again fasten it together because it's a bit thinner than the white stuff I was using earlier. And I think it's all I need. And then I'll go over later again with some twine to make it look rustic and try and hide the wire. So now we've got a bit of shape for the frame, and I'm just looking at the reference of the Kenner to try and work out, like, what does this glider roughly look like, and that's where I'm getting the ideas for the shapes and so on. So there again, a bit more wire just to strap it together, that central piece, and then these two I'm going to fit together later, but right now just sort of tidying up little odds and ends, little bits of where the mold's gone a bit weird. And here's a mahogany color in Vallejo airbrush spray, so just sort of spraying it brown just to give it a bit of consistency, and on both pieces the same. So just an overall color of brown. Some of the color comes through from underneath, so it's not entirely flat color, which is quite nice. Back to the wings. I've made a second piece now, and learning from my mistakes, I'm making these tassels much longer, so I've got plenty of tassel to play with as I fasten it to the frame. So that would be my advice. Start with, like, plan for long tassels. Your tassels can never be too long, as Dolly Parton probably once said. And once that's done, again, it's just sort of tidying up, making sure the shape is roughly the same. They're not exactly symmetrical, but that's okay. And again, making it look a little more patchwork here, so I didn't need to fit this bit on, but I just fancied breaking up the color a little bit and having a bit more of a patchwork vibe. So you can see I'm just gluing it on the end. Same process, glue it down, cut it to the shape, and then where it's doubled over, just lifting away where it's 2-ply and cutting it back. And that way both sides then have that sort of double color and the wing doesn't get too heavy or thick. So that's what we're working with at the moment. Oh, again, yeah, just change that one tassel out, just again for effect, just because it looked a bit too tan in that corner. So just really sort of going by my nose at this point, mixing up the colors, making it feel a bit homespun, a bit haphazard, cobbled together by the Murderbears in a rush. And now we're going to try and fix it to the frame. So once you start folding over the tassels. So try and leave, you can see there's a gap, there's like little gaps, which is what actually the Kenner version looks like. There are gaps, so I've tried to leave little holes there with the tassel, so that's deliberate. And then folding over, I found that using these mini bulldog clips was a good way to sort of hold them in place while the glue was setting. And then just shuffle that along, shuffle it around, clamp it down, move along, and just keep bit by bit just gluing them down. It was a little bit fiddly, but we got there in the end. There we go. And once that was done and it was all dry, then it was time just to trim off the excess bits. So just cutting back, so it's sort of tidy-ish. That was quite pleasing, felt like progress. So just trimming those back. And then fixing this second piece again, just cutting out a little bit so it sat a bit flatter on the frame, so that it all joins together a bit more easily. And again, that 0.4mm crafting wire just to tie them on initially. Here I've got, I'm going to look at the boulders now that the Ewoks drop rather ineffectively. So a bit of tinfoil, a couple of tinfoil balls, and some PVA glue with 1 part, so 2 parts PVA glue, 1 part water. Chuck in some ripped up, in this case it was paper bag, threw that in, and this was a messy business, but just put these strips over the tinfoil and just wodged them around until it felt like everything was covered and it was sort of stuck. It was much messier than I thought it was going to be, and I found that actually making longer strips was better. So the second ball I used much longer strips, and just trying to make them not look too papery, so just sort of mashing them down really. This little bit of string we're going to come back to later, so it's just a bit of twine, white twine, and I just wanted it to be a bit stiffer for something I've got in mind later, so chucked that in the PVA, left it to dry. Then back to the glider, and now covering over where the wire is with something that looks a bit more Ewok appropriate. So this, again, this twine, and then I couldn't tie a knot. In the Scouts for years, but I can't tie a decent knot, so I was just gluing them down, and it just was easier. So once I'd wrapped them round a few times over the top of the wire, hiding the wire, glue the twine down over top, cut off the loose bit, and job's a good 'un. And you can see there's these almost like plaster, those 6 bits there. That's just little scrap bits that I've cut and glued on to help hold the frame to the wing, and I thought they looked kind of plausible as a way of fastening one thing to the other. The next problem then to solve was how to fix the bear to the glider, so the harness piece, that was the Kenner version there. So I figured I'd start with some crafting wire and just bent this to shape as like one area for his hands, and his hands fitted pretty well onto this piece of wire just by chance. And then I made a couple of hooks that you could hang the boulders off, but there was a problem with this. It was handy, to use because it's very flexible to work out how long the wires needed to be and so on, but I tried to paint them brown, sort of knowing it wouldn't work, and it was bad, and there was no real way of making it look a bit more natural and Ewok-y. So I went back to the leftover bits of plastic plant that I had and used that instead, and it's got a sort of a viney vibe because it's sort of green as well. I didn't have enough longer pieces, so I had to use two pieces and join them together just with a bit of sticky tape around the middle here, and as you'll see in a minute, we're going to cover that over anyway, so that didn't really matter. I'm also then making an alternative hook for the boulders to hang from. So here, just taping it on, always sort of planning then to cover it anyway, so the tape won't be seen, because I'm going to cover it with this sort of rough twine, which is pretty rusticy, so it's just garden twine. And then again, because I can't trust my knots, I'm just gluing the thing down And the glue actually takes away some of the fluffiness of the twine, so it was a little bit hairy, and the glue sort of reduced some of that as well, so it wasn't all bad. Just trim it to size, and that's kind of that piece done. And then on the other piece, again, just wrapping around. So this is the belly piece that goes under the Ewok's belly, so it's got a nice bit of sort of cushioning with the twine just glued in and trimmed off again. So kind of finished it nicely, and it was much more rustic than I could have made the black wire, the crafting wire, so worked out for the best really, just using the existing leftovers from the plants. Here I had to trim a bit of his cowl away because I couldn't get his arm up sufficiently, so there wasn't enough mobility, so I just trimmed a little bit of the cowl, and there he can grab hold a little bit fiddly, but playing around with it and kind of got it about how we want it. Now coming back to a couple of last touching up jobs. So the twine just looked a bit too white for me, so I went over with a kind of cream colour, just painting over nice and easy, and then touching up where some of the paint had come off the frame. This part made a big difference, I think, and it's really just going over the whole wing with a bit of black wash, so black acrylic paint mixed with water, a bit of brown as well occasionally, and just trying to tie it all together, dirtying it up a little bit. I was a bit worried about doing it, as you know, if anyone who's done a wash, you put it on and it's like, oh, I've made a mess of it, I've bugged it up, but actually it looked okay and kind of ties it all together somehow. I did think I'd put a little bit too much on, so I got a wet wipe and took bits of it off in places, give it a little clean here and there, just to sort of make a little bit more variety so it's not quite so uniform. But yeah, I was really pleased that I weathered it, so I'd recommend doing that as well. Here, mixing a little bit, coming back to that PVA'd piece of string you remember, so mixing a little bit of brown and white, there's a creamy colour. Going to come back to that in a bit. Now, on to these boulders. So the PVA has dried finally, and giving it a spray with like a grey-blue colour all over. And then it's on this bag because it means that the balls don't stick. It's really hard to paint a ball, because what do you rest them on when they're drying? It's impossible. Anyway, so then putting a bit of black wash on, and here I am hair drying my balls, and yeah, they're getting thrown around a bit. And just then with a black wash, filling in the crevices, so we've got like a darker shade in there in the crevices and cracks, and then with a mascara brush and a lighter grey colour just going over, and then once that was dry, an even lighter colour, almost white, just again with the mascara brush, letting it sort of dry brush, I suppose, just catching the raised areas, and it ended up looking pretty good. I was amazed, frankly. Then you've got to make the things that are holding the boulders, the ropes that are holding the boulders. I found the easiest way was just to make 2 loops, sellotape them together, and then glue in position on the boulders. So the boulders don't need to come out of the ropes, so they can just be glued into place, and let that set. And then again, just covering over where I've taped with a sort of noosey effect, I guess, and then clamping it down while it dries. And that produced 2 fairly decent boulders, I thought. So we're going to hang those at the end, come back to those. Remember that wire that I PVA'd, that string that I PVA'd, now just cutting it into tiny little pieces, bit of super glue, dunk it in there, and then the effect I was going for was like a couple of rough stitches, so it looks like it's been patched up in places from failed previous flights, maybe. So just a little bit of sort of rough Ewok-y stitching. And now it's pretty much ready for its flight and some photography.
Here he is, the bear that dared to dream. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you like it, obviously hit like and subscribe, of course. But I'd be really interested to hear, has anyone else tackled this? What techniques did you use? Anything in particular you think I should have done instead? You know, open to thoughts. But I'm really pleased with him overall. I like that he's got this sort of homespun feel. It looks like he could have been put together in a forest by those little lovable murder bears. Yeah, this stand, by the way, is 2 stands put together, just cheap stands from eBay. So it's a kind of fragile, which is why I'm sort of moving it around a little bit gingerly. He's going to sit on a shelf with a work in progress Endor display. That's been there for like 8 months. I'm going to get around to finishing Endor display at some point. Please do have a go at it. It's such a fun build. It really isn't hard. It's up there with my Bantha in terms of satisfaction. I love my 3D printer, but there's something super cool about putting something together like, almost entirely with your hands. So yeah, really pleased with this. Let me know what you thought, as always. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. See you on the next crafty build.